Welcome to Crypto Disrupted, a cryptocurrency and blockchain podcast with your hosts, Trent Lipinski and Greg Kerr.
All right, welcome to another episode of Crypto Disrupted. I'm Greg Kerr, it's Trent Lipinski, and I'm here with Gerard Dache in Washington, D.C. We're here today to talk about how Gerard is engaging with the U.S. government on policy and adaptation of the blockchain. So welcome, Gerard.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm guessing you want me to say something.
Yeah. Go ahead and give us a background. Who are you?
Sure. Gerard Dache. My background has been in government contracting for the last 15, 20 years. Primarily, my background was in something called CMMI, and what those of us in that industry do is we go and evaluate government contractors. So I've been around the world, probably evaluated over 100 different organizations, small companies, big companies, to see if they have the capability to deliver large IT contracts. Mm-hmm. And I've evaluated companies that make surveillance systems for the Chinese government. I've folks involved in the nuclear industry, all sorts of government, defense, civil agencies, CDC, NIH. I mean, pretty much the whole spectrum. And in all of those companies, what we do is we look to see, do they have the capabilities to do engineering, management, support, so that if the government issues a contract for millions of dollars, can this contractor be trusted to be able to deliver on time, on schedule?
Okay, so due diligence aspect of the U.S. government, or from the contractor.
For contractors,
okay.
Right. So the deal would be that they would hire somebody like me to come in, and interestingly enough, the Chinese would hire somebody like me to come in and evaluate their contractors because they didn't always have confidence that some of their own people would be able to give an objective.
Third-party view, tribal dynamics, or like political parties.
Exactly. Okay. So honesty and integrity has really been kind of our calling card, right? And trust. That's really been the cornerstone of our business. Anyway, so not too long ago, I noticed, like most people, I got in the space when I noticed my son bought just a little bit of Bitcoin, and he paid for his college tuition and car and a motorcycle and living expenses. And I thought, there's something here. Mm-hmm. So when most of the stuff right at that time was going on in fintech. And so there's a lot of activity in Wall Street, Silicon Valley, but I couldn't really see anything in government. It was kind of like this dry wind blowing across the desert. But I thought this thing is going to be big. So I didn't know any people. I didn't know any of the technology. I didn't know anybody in the industry. So I wasn't quite ready to compete. Right? I couldn't compete with IBM or Deloitte in New York. So I said, well, I got to figure out something here in the DC area. So rented this big, beautiful place, a place called the Tower Club in Tyson's Corner. Paid about $500 for this gorgeous room. Did marketing like crazy. And besides my wife and my son, 2 people showed up. Right? And one of them left early. I think I told you this when I were initially on the phone. So I was somewhat demoralized. We started, this is about a year and a half ago, in the summer of 2016.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So by that fall, we started meeting in libraries. We have 6, 7, 8 people showing up. By the winter time, we're getting 30, 40, 50 people showing up. Last March, we got a tax EIN number. In May through July, we're on a website with some functionality. And today we have over 3,000 people attending events in 45 cities globally.
What? Awesome. So they're physical events or virtual events?
They're physical events.
Physical events.
Right. So we have chapters. We have chapters here in DC. We also have chapters, throughout the Northeast. New York. We've got them in Boston. We've got them down in Charlotte, Atlanta. We have several in Florida, several in Texas, Denver, Southern California, Northern California, Hawaii, London, Paris, Moscow. Singapore, Sydney, Mexico City.
And so they're just working groups interested in the blockchain, or?
No, these are chapters. So the chapters are geographically based, right? Because any kind of government contract, any kind of government engagement is going to happen at a local level. There's going to be some government office in some city, state, country that wants to engage. We also have created working groups. So the working groups are domains that go across geographic bounds. And so you talk to Chris, who's part of our energy working group, right? And so the way it works is the energy group focuses on that topic, right? And that they can then connect to anybody in the local chapter. So if somebody in a particular city or state or country wants to connect with experts in energy, supply chain, identity management, voting, whatever those topics are, right? We now have a mechanism, a communication layer, where that anybody anywhere can connect with that expertise, regardless of where it is located.
Okay, I like it because and I love to see, and we've been exploring on the web or on the podcast this idea of like kind of East Coast, West Coast business culture, and of course on the East Coast are like, oh, it's geographically sectioned, and then this cross domain horizontal functionality. Mm-hmm. So energy in Atlanta probably has its own little working group, but they're also part of a larger just energy work group. All right, so that's 3,000 people in a year and a half, growing from 2, but 1 left early, to 3,000 in a year and a half. Look how quickly that idea spread. Have you found a commonality in the type of people that are joining?
Absolutely. Yeah, unbelievable. Okay, so most of the folks that are in this space are really visionaries, mm-hmm. right? There are a lot of people that they've heard of this technology and they're not really, they're not bought in yet, right? But the folks that we engage with are folks that can see something, can sort of imagine the possibilities, mm-hmm. right? It's a very different mindset. And you and I were talking a little bit before the podcast started, and you said something that really resonated with us, or maybe it was Trent, that the people wanted to volunteer, but there was nowhere to, right? Because honestly, there are not that many blockchain projects, but there are so many people that were reading about this and saying, oh, I want to participate. So what we wanted to do was create volunteer opportunities. We said, hey, come together and join a working groups. Hey, come together in chapters. And what we did was we created a place where we could plant flags where people could gravitate towards, people had commonality of interest and purpose, right? And when you get that kind of concentration of capability and knowledge, then opportunities come out of that.
No, yeah. You saw an opportunity to create value.
Exactly.
I think that's one of those things you start to learn. Blockchain allows you to assign value. So getting value into the right places.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Trent.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, so one of the things that I was reading on your website, and one of the things that interested me about your group is, you've got an ethical statement. So ethics is very important, it seems, to what you guys are doing, which, I think is a different approach than a lot of people, in the blockchain space. Crypto's obviously gotten this kind of reputation that, it may be scammy, or there may be some things like that. But, the approach that you're taking, you're really bringing legitimacy to this, and you're looking at it from, both an ethical standpoint, but also bringing this to a government. And bringing these technologies to the government to be able to solve real world problems. Can you kind of go into the ethics of the blockchain and, where your organization comes from and, how you guys are looking at this?
Sure. Well, and I want to share with you a funny story. The other night I was at Starbucks, and I can't remember, this guy overheard me or I overheard him. We started talking about this, and he said, oh, yeah, Bitcoin. He said, that's some combination of black magic and voodoo. Right? I was like, well, it's not exactly the right technical protocols, but no, I get what you're saying, right? It's amazing how much misunderstanding there is. But I think any new thing, especially something that is such a major paradigm shift, right? You guys refer to it as a disruptor. This is clearly, because it's a paradigm shift, it is going to be disruptive. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, stuff like that. So the first thing about it is, and I'll get to the issue of the ethics, but the first thing is, well, what is this thing, and what are the capabilities it can do, right? And so with any new technology, the internet, right, telephones, mm-hmm. there's a great capability to do good and to do evil. Right? I got an email this morning from a very nice gentleman in Africa, and he's trying to help some people there, and he said, look, how about we've got a large sum of money, and we just like to go deposit that into your account, right? Very nice guy. And I sent him back, and I said, I'd love to help you. Here's my Bitcoin address. Just transfer the funds there, and we'll take care of it. So, apparently they must have solved the problem because he didn't want to engage with me anymore. So again, the internet, blockchain has a capability for it. So getting back to your question, we want to find the right balance, right, between government, and we believe that there's a legitimate place for government. So, we talk a little bit about the environment. I spent a lot of time in China, right? And for the experience I had, the environment was awful there, right? I come back to the United States, and I really appreciate what PPA does, right? I don't believe that we should abolish all banks, right? I don't believe that blockchain is going to it's a technology, and people are still involved, and all of the things that have impacted all the problems we've had up now will still be there even if you're blockchain, right? We're still going to need certain police functions, environmental controls, and stuff like that. However, there's a lot of things that government does that now that we have the blockchain, we don't necessarily need the government to do that. Land titling might be an example, right? It solves a lot of problems. Transparency, right? There's a lot of the level of trust that people have towards our government is on a rapid decline in the last 30, 40 years, right? And the media, I think, really kind of feeds into that because whether you're on the right or the left, the media is going to tell you all the bad things that the other guys did all the time until you're at the point where you just loathe and hate, whether you're on one side or the other, you're going to distrust them. The blockchain allows us to bring some sanity. So we want to find the right balance between the two, right? And we believe that transparency is really important. We believe that the blockchain allows us to have more freedoms, right? And yet at the same time, we not be too limited. So it's important that we maintain that balance. Does that address that at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what I kind of gathered when I was reading your website. It sounds like you're actually trying to take this technology, solve real world problems, apply those problems to the government, because at the end of the day, the blockchain ultimately, as you were saying, it can replace the government in a lot of ways. So, you can use decentralized and distributed systems to be able to essentially mimic or replicate a lot of these existing services and actually even improve upon them, and then remove, the elements that allow for corruption and that allow for, certain things to be manipulated behind the scenes by using transparent systems and having systems that are designed to be transparent in nature. You remove that, the capability for corruption essentially. So, again, that was something that, I really resonated with when I read your guys' website and started researching what you guys are trying to accomplish.
Every time we have an election, think of all the hoopla that goes around the voting process, right? Mm-hmm. And then even when that happens, and there's always a claim that something is illegitimate, people lost, stolen, people voted twice, whatever. The blockchain allows us to essentially have a voting process that I think is going to be a lot more sane, right? One person, one vote. It'll be very clear who's eligible to vote, who's not. Those votes essentially will be recorded in such a way that everybody can verify the integrity of it without sacrificing privacy, right? So for example, the way that would work would be if you're in a room with 20 people, right? The way that we vote now is we have everybody their vote. They give it to one person. That one person counts all the votes and says the winner is Sally. Right? And we have to trust that person that they didn't use or manipulate. What the blockchain allows us to do is to take those 20 votes, right, and let everybody make a copy of the 20 votes and count them themselves.
Yep.
Right. So that that Sally or Jim or whoever got how many votes they did.
That's right.
Right. And again, it takes all the drama. Right. I was talking recently to a gentleman, Mike Allman. He's running for a House seat in San Diego, Sun California, and he's looking to put his entire campaign on the blockchain.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So what it is commitment to democracy. And we've had several conversations about direct democracy versus representative democracy. But what he's going to do is he's going to put the issues out there for everybody to vote on. It's just and be transparent to people how they vote, right? And what messages his constituents, really want to hear. And then he's making a commitment to vote to willing people. Now, in his district, there are some issues where his people are being right, and there's some places where there's people being left, right? And whether it's gun control or immigration or any position. But the way our standard political system works is if you get voted by the Republicans and Democrats, you basically, and I hate to say it, but you just have to go down the party line regardless of what people sent you to the office. And the issues are a lot more complicated now than a simple, right.
Yeah.
So, in the political process, in voting, in the business process, the blockchain gives us so many capabilities. If we do it right, hopefully we'll just reduce a lot of time.
Yeah, I see it like you're saying, where it shifts the paradigm in many ways. Where, I think the guys in Freakonomics books. They talk about their time where they were having a 3-day conference on horse war streets in New York City, and it ended after 1 day because everybody was so frustrated there was no answer, and then nobody could predict the internal combustion engine coming along and changing that dynamic. Blockchain coming in and skirting a lot of this. As I talk about blockchain governance in Africa, a lot of people talk about pushback, like, oh, the African governments won't allow that. And I'm like, this is going to be out of their control. It's going to hit systems in a way that can shift the way of pilfer in so many different ways that people are going to have to re-examine. I'm sure there will be, corruption around the blockchain of some sorts, but it's going to take much more clever and sophisticated criminal to do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't underestimate the power of the pushback, right? And I want to be careful not to disclose stuff that's told in the comments, but there are folks in some aspects of governments that have really been sort of pushing the blockchain, and the entrenched inertia or lack of inertia, right? By people that don't want to see change, right? Because if we go to an organization and say, "Hey, this will be great. We'll be more transparency. We want to spend as much money. We'll be more efficient." Well, there are a lot of folks in government that want to spend the money, because if they don't spend the money, it takes away power. They don't want transparency. And unfortunately, in the government space, the folks we would be reliant on to implement these blockchain solutions are the very folks that don't want to lose that power with that. So, the movement, in some governments, there are governments like Estonia and things like that, where they're embracing it. But in many, many, many of these governments at all levels, you're going to see a lot of entrenched resistance. And it's going to be a slog, right?
And I've seen it, and that's where it's come into kind of clever kind of schemes to say and convince, and I'm working in West Africa to kind of talk to them and say, hey, if you're the political party that is on the blockchain and practicing radical transparency, then every European donor will work with you over everybody else. And I'm trying to pitch it that way to say, hey, I can use political legitimacy, transparency, and responsiveness. The blockchain will allow you to be the most responsive and the most transparent, hence you'll yield the most political power. And it's starting to resonate. And when you kind of like give that 1-2 punch of this can't be stopped, because if you don't do it, somebody next to you is going to do it.
I think you're right that it can't be stopped. But again, I think it's going to be who wants transparency? The party out of power wants transparency. It's just the way it works.
Well, Gerard, after talking to you, and I don't know if this was a coincidence, last time I talked to you on the phone, 10 minutes later, co-founder of the Tea Party hit both me and Trent up on LinkedIn, and I started thinking about it. I went, you're right. That is something that we can agree on. Like me and this guy probably come around full circle on political spectrum because of this kind of transparency in government. And I can see where the alt-right would sit there and say, yes, we need to look at this as an elite issue, and our elites need to be bound by transparency. I think the blockchain is maybe that kind of movement.
It's interesting. In the last several months, we had the opportunity to meet with Trey Gowdy's office and Cory Booker's office. I don't know if you know who those two gentlemen are. They're congressmen. And it would be fair to say that they're not exactly on the same side of the aisle, right? They're probably, there's probably not a lot of things that they agree to politically, right? But with respect to this, from the conversations that I had, they're both looking for the staffers that I talked to. We're both looking for all the good things that this offers, right? Now, the implementation, and all of it's going to be a tough road. But for people who are working in this industry, there's going to be a lot of work for a long time, right? Because where most of the folks in the government are right now is they're with a very small pilot projects, relatively low impact. The folks that are going to be responsible for this are very risk averse, right? They're not going to take big chances, especially if something as big as government. If you screw it up, there's big consequences. So right now, there's a lot of little projects, but they're not really huge impact.
Where are you seeing most movement? What agencies out there up front, or who's engaging most?
So one use case that's a very popular use case right now is really about land title, right? We're seeing, Ghana was probably the first place where that came on my radar screen. But it's we're Government Blockchain Association. We're not the U.S. Government Blockchain Association. So we're not focused at U.S. federal or state because we've realized that governments face the same problems, right? All governments have to do things like voting, licensing, permitting, right, inventory management, taxation. There's a certain set of things that all governments have to do. So those are the kinds of things we focus on, right? And then within that, there's different types of things. So you've got the whole financial regulatory piece, right? You got the economic analysis piece, and then you have what I would call the citizen services. So in the citizen services, I'm going to go back to land title. There's a lot of places in the world where people they don't trust their government, right? They'll say, hey, that farm that you had in your family for many years, right? I don't think so. I'm scratching your name off the title and I'm putting my family's name on it. And there's no recourse, right? In many places, there are no records. There are some governments around the world where everything they do is verbal, right? Where a lot of the government officials can't read, or they don't have power, right? There's no internet. There's no. So you would be surprised how many places in the world where there is really a lack of trust and credibility. Here in the United States, we complain about it a lot, but by and large, right, when it comes to like county offices and things like that, and we go in there, we expect that there's a degree of integrity. We're not trying to rescue it. So that's why in places in the third world, we're seeing the implementation of blockchain solutions, like your experiences in Africa, right? I mean, isn't that when you first started thinking about the blockchain as a solution for some energy problems?
Oh yeah, it was coming back from Africa and getting to San Francisco, hearing about cryptocurrencies, and then going, wow, this skirts a lot of issues that the developing world is facing. And yeah, if the blockchain fills the trust gap, if you look to see where the widest trust gap is, Africa just has to be this gleaming. There's no trust in African business,
right? And then I would say second to Africa is probably South America, right? In fact, our land titling working group is very extensively involved with Latin America, and then there's some that's through here. So land titling is a big one. I would have thought voting, but I haven't really seen very many implementations of voting. What we are seeing is in the U.S. government, there's a lot of little pilot projects, right? So in healthcare, for example, CDC is looking at a way to be able to capture information about diseases and epidemics, right? Because we got to capture data from a lot of different sources, right? And they need to manage and control who has access to that data and things like that. So they got a pilot project. The military, they're looking at it from a security standpoint, and supply chain, securing the supply chain, right? In terms of border security, there are folks looking at using, so the blockchain is being used from a security standpoint big time, because if you're getting a feed from a camera on the border, you need to know that that camera is legitimate and that feed is legitimate, right? That you're not actually looking at that fence from 3 days ago, right?
Yeah.
So they're using the blockchain to validate that the data feeds that they're getting are accurate and haven't been tampered with, right? So there's a lot of sort of pilot projects from a security perspective and from a supply chain perspective. What else? CDC. But they're most, the GSA has got a pilot project where when people want to get a certain type of a contract, there's a fast track process that they use, right? So there's a pilot project in place right now to basically manage that. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of sort of small, disconnected use cases. In the state governments, probably about 60 to 70% of all states either have a blockchain pilot going on or are seriously moving towards it, right? In fact, I would say it's probably closer to 70%. And then you've probably got about 30% that are aware of it, but they're not doing it. So it's little bits and pieces all over the place. There are I'm not aware of any big blockchain projects.
I thought of it, as my mind kind of wraps the concept of my government career. And then I started thinking about, I actually remember a Daily Show where they talked about Veterans Affairs. And I guess at one point, the VA record warehouse was sagging. It was so heavy, full of records, that the floors were sagging. And Jon Stewart, I think at the time, made the point that paper was good for the pharaohs. That our soldiers and veterans are still in the same system as the pharaohs, and the blockchain might be a place where veterans may be able to start forcing the hand of government, because actually, if you look at the U.S. government's history with veterans, after every major war, usually veterans galvanize and start raising a threat to the federal government. And so maybe this is one of those places where you could demand our veteran benefits be placed on the blockchain so they can't be tampered with. Almost maintain veterans' benefits as sacred.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you remember, not a few years ago, there were some veterans who died because they never were seen, because apparently the VA office had two sets of books, right? They had the official set of books that had the waiting times that they were sending up the chain and getting bonuses based on that. Then they had the desk drawer where when somebody wanted to make an appointment, they would put it on their desk drawer on a piece of paper, and when they were then able to be seen, they would then add them to the official waiting list. So they could demonstrate. Right, and they were compensated at bonuses based on the waiting times. The reality was there were people who were dying, right, because they weren't getting seen, and the reporting had no integrity. So that's exactly the kind of use case that something like that would be perfect for the blockchain. Again, the people who would be responsible for implementing it are the people who would be exposed if they had it. and that's the hardest part with getting things. That's why voting for elected officials like my friend, he's committed. It's generally the baby boomers what's the generation right after the baby boomers? It's the younger congressmen and senators and stuff like that.
Kind of Gen X a little bit. Yeah.
Those are the ones that are probably more likely to influence something.
And it might be more healthy. Sometimes when government changes too quick,
it
can get chaotic. But yeah, if you phase it in almost generationally, people start coming in, start running their campaigns on the blockchain to start introducing it. And I guess people like us trying to kind of infiltrate government. I feel like, I'm a partner with USAID and 2 grids in Africa. And with our energy coin, those are the first 2 that'll get it. So I'm kind of taking the strategy that I'm going to force the U.S. government to deal with the blockchain and our cryptocurrency without their compliance. They're not a deciding factor, but they obviously have an interest now in the sustainability of the grids that they spend U.S. tax dollars on. And this is a good way to kind of maximize those U.S. dollars to make sure that these grids work and that there's less pilfer on them.
And it's interesting. The UN is very interested in this space because they've got to basically make sure that the funds that they distribute go to the right people in the right place. And there's a lot of corruption in that space. So that's a center of gravity where there's desire to fix that problem. Also, organizations like FEMA, right? When there's a natural disaster, what do? Throw tons of money at it. We generally don't have problems. Blockchain is a great opportunity to help us in those areas. So, again, there are a lot of folks that want to bring these solutions into place. There's also resistance, right? And again, for people who are looking for work in this space, that's a great place.
Yeah, and that's how I feel at the international level, where maybe it is hard to focus and point a gun of transparency on ourselves. But when you say, hey, the German taxpayer is demanding that contractors in X country be on the blockchain and track those funds, because then every Deutschmark is going from, or every euro is going right down to the African it was intended to help.
Yeah.
And we can start tracking it. And I think that will create the almost an identity crisis when you start having use cases within, how government funds are impacting the developing world. It'll be hard for the internal government to sit there and say, why isn't this being helped, being done in Detroit or, even here in DC?
Well, when you get on the subject of funds, you start to peel the onion back on a really tough subject, right? A subject that a lot of people don't want to look at. When I speak to a lot of people in government, they say, don't talk to me about cryptocurrencies. I only want to talk about the blockchain. And they're looking at the blockchain as an opportunity to bring efficiencies to business processes, right? Mm-hmm. And then you got the law enforcement folks that have a particular perspective, because as more and more people start to use cryptocurrencies, and they will, right? Then we have more economic activity that's not going through our traditional financial institutions. Well, governments regulate societies through financial institutions. So if that activity is not going through, well, let me just give you an example. If you and I, if I send you a Bitcoins for a transaction, it doesn't go through a bank, right? Then the government has no way of knowing what happened, right? So assuming it's a legal, legitimate thing, it's all good. But if we're involved in anything nefarious, they've got no way to look into this, right? And that concerns them, right? Because as we look at what's happened to Bitcoin prices as an example, right, versus the inflationary pressures on the dollar, more and more people are going towards cryptocurrencies, right? Now, that means the government loses more and more control and oversight over what's happening. But that's scary. That's not as scary as this. Currently, our government and many other governments, they are politically incentivized to spend more money than they bring in. Right? Mm-hmm. I spend more money on programs. We get more jobs and all that stuff, right? But if I raise taxes, I'm disincentivized. So I'm incentivized to spend more money and lower taxes, right? So what happens? The debt goes up and up, right? Last year, the amount of interest that we paid to service the debt was more than every federal program minus the DOD. That was the interest on the debt, right? And if you look at the U.S. debt clock, it goes higher and higher and higher, right? Okay, so what does the government do? They print more money. When they print more money and the supply increases, the amount of money that we have in our bank accounts, right, decreases. You increase supply, right? So the dollar relative to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency continues to erode. What does that do? That pushes more people into crypto. Well, at a certain point, governments may not be able to print more money because more and more economic activity is going to go into the crypto space.
It's fun to watch. I've seen Trent advise clients on why crypto's been taking a hit. And he goes, the system, the dollar got an injection with the Trump tax plan. That was a big plus for the system. And then Christmas, where the Christian world was in a gift-giving phase. That's another dump back into the corporate centralized system. And then currently he talks about the Chinese New Year is another gift-giving cycle, which would be a big plus. So after the Chinese New Year, where the East comes back in and then the competition between the fiat and the crypto start playing back out, that's where crypto will start heading back up. And it's kind of, I think, how you see it too, is
you can actually monitor this. So, I ran a startup for about 5 years, and we had these kind of trends of when people were buying our products. And as I started doing consulting and working with other startups, the trends were the same. So what I found is with every company that I was going to, and once I finally got to look at their financials, I identified the exact same trends that I was seeing at my own startup years ago and saw the exact same trend that was happening. And basically, what I was seeing was the trend of the value of the US dollar. I was seeing when people actually had US dollars to be able to spend and when they didn't. And you could see these very clear trends happening in the market of watching the value of the US dollar, watching inflation, and seeing these things happen. So this data is very transparent. Anybody who runs a software as a service business, anybody who runs any kind of service business, they already have insight into this. They're already seeing it in their own revenue. So they can already calculate and predict, that, the US dollar is, going to take a dip during the holidays, if you're not in commercial, if you're not selling, Christmas stuff that people buy during Christmas. So if you're in the business sector, December is usually not a great month because everyone's buying gifts for their families, and the U.S. dollar value is going to basically be recycled through these mega corporations as everybody's buying gifts. So you can see the same trends happen in China with Chinese New Year, and you can see these same things happening all around the world all at the same time. And then now we have crypto to kind of base that off of. So we can look at the price of Bitcoin and we go, oh, Bitcoin's going up. So that means the US dollar is going down. So we now have this other metric to kind of analyze, where fiat currencies are coming from. Because before we had to measure fiat currencies against other fiat currencies. So, you were measuring two flawed systems against each other with, artificially inflated numbers. Well, now you've got crypto where, the numbers are pretty finite and, they can't be faked. So at least with some cryptocurrencies. So now we actually have a real, we have a real value system that we can actually go, oh, like fiat currency is, doing this. And, is Bitcoin doing this or is fiat currency doing this? And that's kind of the big question mark.
Yeah, well, the other thing that's relevant to that is, before when the U.S. dollar was essentially we controlled access to monetary systems, right? You're now starting to see other countries like Iran, North Korea, Venezuela. You're now looking at cryptocurrencies to basically get around sanctions, right? And so it's not just countries, but there are a lot of companies. People are recognizing that I can get around the rules, right? if I use this kind of crypto, Monero or whatever. And again, I'm not advocating any of that stuff. I'm just recognizing it's real.
Oh, yeah. I've had this conversation in DC since being here, and everybody's pointing to Iran to say, we've lost a leverage point if everybody moves to crypto, that, it's not, we use the banks to leverage these sanctions, things like that.
The banks are going to be, just like you talk about disruption. Once the banks essentially become nullified, the impact that this has on international relations, on political power in general, this thing, people have no idea how disruptive. This is just cryptocurrencies, right? You take voting, you take all of this other stuff. Somebody asked me this, where they said, it seems like we don't have all the answers yet. I said, Jimmy Crickets, we don't even know the questions yet.
Yeah. Because I think of it this way, and that's only looking at through one scope of like U.S. control over the Iranian economy. And I sit there and go, actually, the blockchain and cryptocurrencies give the Iranian middle class a lot more schlitz to get things done. That is the biggest attack against the regime, is that their own middle class will start growing because of this technology. So it really doesn't matter. If we've lost a leverage tool, I think people are going to gain power, and unsympathetic governments are going to have to deal with that in some sort.
I think the real takeaway is this is going to force major change, right? And this goes back to our ethics thing. We want people to understand what the change is, and we want to try to maneuver that change in a way that's a win-win for the most of the people, right? Again, going back to our ethic of freedom, right? That people should be free. However, that there's a legitimate place for governments to establish society where people can be free and a safe, productive, what's the term that they use for basically the common good, right? But if we stick our head in the sand, right? If we come up with regulations that essentially are too onerous, we will drive that innovation out of our country and into other countries where they're open, right? The UK is very pro this technology. Governments like Estonia. Estonia, I think, has offered e-citizenship to anybody in the world, right? And they want to create an environment where it's easy for people to come and electronically, essentially register there and interact, because so much of the business now is online, right? If you register your business in Estonia, they could become the wealthiest country in the world because they're open to the space.
Being first, yeah.
And many of our legislators, right, essentially have their heads in the sand and want to drive this technology away, and we totally missed the boat. At the same time, there are real concerns about if we open it up, kind of chaos, the governments lose power. And if you take something away from governments without helping them understand how they fulfill their legitimate role, they're not going to walk away from it. Right? So we need a lot of smart people to figure out a lot of problems.
Yeah, it was interesting because so the Federalist Papers kind of lay out horizontal and vertical competitions in government. And as I think of the blockchain, I'm like, okay, if we can handle more things at the local level, right, this is going to shift identity because less issues are going to be taken to the higher sovereign. So if we're handling water rights, we're handling what we're going to do about X, Y, Z at that county level, then less goes to the state, less gets pushed up to the national level. And I think over time, blockchain may change our national identities, or at least the influence of kind of nation state capitals on our everyday identity. Coming from Monrovia, where 2 blocks from the Capitol building, the government didn't really have reach.
Yeah.
And then I came to the United States, and I went to Oregon, and I saw American flags on all the bridges in Portland. Wow, that's great brand identity. It's lasted all the way. I've seen the opposite. So the U.S. has that, but I honestly do see that there is an understanding of kind of people's power, self-determination across the political spectrum among Americans. I think that's a value people hold, and once they learn about the blockchain past the cryptocurrency phase of it, and they start seeing, and as politicians and organizations like yours start advocating and pushing things to the blockchain, they start seeing and getting better governance.
There's no question that this is what the people want, right? The last election, when you look at the immense popularity of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, it was all based on populism, right? And I know a lot of people that said, my first choice is either Bernie or Donald, and my second choice is Bernie or Donald, right? And what it was, I like these guys that essentially are sticking it to the big, powerful government systems, right? And interestingly enough, I was in a meeting at the GSA, and the CIO for OMB was there, right? So Mick Mulvaney at the time was a director of OMB. I think he still is, but he was also he was involved in the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, right? And so the CIO of OMB was having a conversation with us, and she said, "Let me make it explicitly clear: this administration is serious. It is dedicated and committed to blockchain, and it will not be deterred." Right? And I think it's part of the campaign platform of draining the swamp. There's an understanding or expectation that this technology can bring transparency. But I got to tell you, there's a lot of institutional pushback. So we'll see a lot of back and forth over the years. It will take a decade or two, I think, for this to really make it a real. But it's starting.
Yeah, 20 years. Okay. See, I keep on thinking if we sneak it in the back door somewhere, and then it's just like those proof cases proliferate, and then almost a demand once again, and maybe a new generation of politician that starts.
I hope so. Yeah. I'm old enough to remember every politician that runs for president. The first thing they said is, "I'm going to bring harmony to the political parties, and I'm going to be bipartisan." Right? And whether it was Barack Obama or Clinton or Bush, either the Bushes, right? They all said the same thing, right? And God bless them all. I mean, I think that they really tried, but these power structures are so deep, right?
Yeah.
And as much as any, and I wish the current president luck in doing some of the things that I know that he's trying to do. But I think President Obama tried to do the same things, and it's just hard. Right? It's just really hard. But we'll do everything we can to support openness and transparency.
Yeah, well, no, we appreciate your work in that. Yeah, change is difficult to find in the human condition, and this is a disrupting technology, and it's going to be hard to do those things. Waste of energy. People look at me all the time. How is everybody not turning their sewage into energy? So don't get me started, But yeah, it comes down to change, and the petrodollar isn't going to fund this. It's not set up to do it, and it won't kill it. So
we just have to find ways, like you're doing, right, to make it in people's best interest, right, to do the behaviors that are going to result. And that's hard, not arguing and fighting politically. We got to create those incentives.
Yeah, you're right. That I say the blockchain allows us to build selfish systems.
Yeah, right.
A system where everybody can get what they want, and it kind of syncopates into what everybody else needs. And if people need value and money, and they also need to clean up, sewage and trash, then all of those can be kind of orchestrated.
Yeah. So let me put in a little plug for.
Please
for
do. Yeah.
If people are interested in kind of getting into this space, learning about it, our website is governmentblockchain.org. We will soon be launching a new site at GBA Global. Right, it's not active now, but it should be active sometime soon. And come to the website. We'd love for you to participate in chapters. We have free local events all over the world. If you want to kind of get involved with the working group, then we'd love for you to join as a member and give you access to some of the top people in their industries. And you got a chance to meet somebody.
Absolutely.
But we would love it as many people to kind of come in and join. I don't want to say join the fight, join the movement.
All right, good. Yeah. Well, thank you. We'll appreciate your time, and thanks for the insight, and we hope to have you back on the show. Thanks a lot.
You bet. Great day.
All right.
Thanks for coming on.